Okay, the next item of business is a debate on motion 20527 in the name of Mark Ruskell on the Greyhound Racing Offences Scotland Bill at Stage 1. I'd invite members wishing to participate in the debate to press the request to speak buttons. I call on Mark Ruskell, the member in charge, to speak to and move the motion. Around 6 minutes. Mr Ruskell.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I say I'm very proud to be bringing this bill to the Chamber. It is a momentous opportunity to end greyhound racing in Scotland and the suffering that these wonderful dogs face. And I'd like to acknowledge the hard work it has taken to get here from my staff, the Non-Government Bills Unit, the tireless campaigners and the public who have consistently highlighted the suffering of greyhounds. And I know some of those people are in the Chamber here tonight. And I'd also like to thank the committee for their scrutiny of this issue over a number of years, the constructive approach of the Scottish Government to consider this bill as it's evolved, and the support I've had from members of all parties in this chamber. Now, this bill is necessary and it is long overdue. Scotland is considered a world leader in animal welfare, but is one of only 8 countries where commercial greyhound racing is still legal. And of these 8, New Zealand, Wales, the US and the state of Tasmania are introducing their own bans on the activity. We have a unique opportunity to end this dangerous activity. There is huge public support, and of course the industry is in decline. Now, my bill was in part inspired by petition PE 1758, brought to this Parliament by Scotland Against Greyhound Exploitation and signed by over 30,000 members of the public. It is clear that greyhound racing is no longer welcome in Scotland. Polling shows 68% of Scots back the ban. The risk of injury and death is embedded into the design of greyhound racing. Greyhound racing on oval tracks is inherently dangerous. Racing at speeds of up to 40 miles an hour on an oval track exerts excessive force on the left fore and the right hind limbs, leading to leg breaks and injury in the dogs. Collisions often occur at the first curve of the track due to the impacts of centrifugal force and the dogs bunching to keep the lure in their sight. Dogs collide with each other or the fencing or stumble, resulting in catastrophic injuries which have lifelong impacts that are rarely seen in other dogs. And many members in this chamber have had the pleasure of meeting Sasha, an ex-racing dog who has visited Parliament on a number of times. And members may have noticed that Sasha has a limp and wears a shoe on her back right foot. And this is because Sasha fell hard on the first bend of a trial race, resulting in her leg being broken in several places and leaving her with a permanently misshapen leg and paw. Her trainer was talked into surrendering her to a charity for further care and rehoming, rather than just simply euthanizing her. Now, that injury was completely preventable and is exactly what this bill will put an end to in Scotland. And the Greyhound Board of Great Britain, who administer the sport, their own data demonstrates this inherent evidence-based risk of injury and fatality. Between 2017 and 2024, there have been over 1,000 trackside deaths and over 30,000 injuries across the UK. And 2024 also saw an increase in the number of track fatalities. There is no legal requirement for independent tracks such as Thornton, the only track left in Scotland, to record or publish data relating to fatalities and injuries. However, as the Scottish Animal Welfare Commission have stated, there is no reason to believe that the risks are any different or lesser at unlicensed tracks in Scotland from elsewhere in the UK. Now, Thornton, that last remaining track, is nearly identical in size and track surface to the licensed track at Shorefield, which saw 197 injuries and 15 deaths between 2018 and 2020 before it closed. And some members will be thinking, why do we need this bill if the industry is in decline in Scotland? There currently is no active racing. But if this bill doesn't pass, there is nothing to prevent greyhound racing restarting, putting more greyhounds at significant risk of injury and death. And this is exactly what happened in Wales. The unlicensed Valley Track in Wales became GBGB registered in 2023. Racing increased fourfold, with more dogs being injured as a result. And whether it's 1 or 100 greyhounds, this unnecessary harm should not be allowed to happen. Only by ending greyhound racing permanently can we ensure this suffering ends. Now, my bill will achieve this, by making it illegal for a person to knowingly use or permit the use of greyhounds in racing at racetracks. The offences set out in the bill covers oval tracks and therefore applies to racing at licensed and independent tracks and relate to any racing activity, such as races, time trials and sales trials. And since all racetracks in Scotland are oval, the bill should ensure no further racing takes place. But it also includes a provision that would allow Scottish ministers to regulate to include other types of tracks if they are opened and if they were deemed to pose a risk to greyhound welfare. Should someone be convicted of an offence, they may be subject to a fine or prison sentence and may have other penalties imposed, such as being prevented from owning a greyhound. But my bill is tightly drawn, with a clear aim of ending the suffering caused directly by racing on oval tracks. But of course, I share wider concerns in relation to breeding, kennelling and transportation of dogs to tracks outside of Scotland. And I do encourage wider work from the Scottish Government, separate to this bill, to address these concerns. Presiding Officer, as long as greyhound racing remains legal, we will see injuries and deaths. I urge members to support the general principles of the bill. Let's take that first and critical step to ending the suffering of greyhounds in Scotland.
Thank you, Mr Ruskell. I now call on Finlay Carson on behalf of the Rural Affairs and Islands Committee. Around 5 minutes. Mr Carson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Firstly, I would like to congratulate the member for getting his bill this far. But this afternoon I'm here to speak on behalf of the Rural Affairs and Islands Committee to set out the findings of our Stage 1 scrutiny of Mark Ruskell's Members' Bill on greyhound racing in Scotland. In commencing its Stage 1 scrutiny, the committee ran a targeted call for views between August to October 2025, and this was followed by evidence sessions with the Minister and the member in charge of the bill. On behalf of the committee, I would like to thank everyone who has contributed to our scrutiny of this issue. The committee has, of course, considered this issue over an extended period, having previously held a short inquiry into petition PE 1758, which urges the Scottish Government to end greyhound racing in Scotland. We agreed to pause consideration of this petition when the bill was introduced in order to let the bill complete its passage through Parliament. The committee as a whole does support the general principles of the bill. However, not all committee members are persuaded that the evidence gathered to date justifies a ban. Myself, Tim Eagle, Rhoda Grant and Beatrice Wishart take the view that a sufficiently robust case has not been made at this stage. Before I speak directly to the bill's provision, I want to lay out how the committee's scrutiny has highlighted important questions which we look forward to discussing in today's debate. At the time of our petition inquiry, the Scottish Government view was that whilst the statistics relating to injuries at tracks regulated by the Greyhound Board of Great Britain, GBGB, were unacceptable, there were insufficient evidence that the welfare risks at independent tracks is comparable to those at GBGB tracks. For those who don't follow greyhound racing in detail, there is one track in Scotland, the independent track at Thornton in Fife. In our report on the petition, we asked the Scottish Government how it intended, therefore, to gather data from the independent track. Whilst there has not been any new data since our petition report, the Scottish Government supports this bill. The Minister told the committee that he believed there are inherent welfare risks associated with greyhound racing at speeds on oval tracks, risks which, in his view, cannot be fully eliminated through regulation or good practice. I will give way.
John Mason.
I thank the convener for giving way. He makes the point that in an unregulated track without data, we don't know what the situation is. Would the assumption not be that the situation will be worse than where it is regulated?
Finlay Carson.
Well, throughout the committee sessions and also in the petition, we didn't hear any evidence of dog injuries or reports to the RSPCA to suggest there was any cruelty. But we're just dealing with the data that was put in front of us, and that wasn't available. So we weren't making assumptions. I will.
Rona Mackay.
Thank the member for taking an intervention. So would the members not agree then that, given that there is evidence of cruelty and animal fatalities and injuries on licensed tracks, it therefore would follow that there will be on an unlicensed track?
Finlay Carson, I'll give you the time back.
I think we've got to be really careful here. We're dealing with tracks in Scotland, and we're dealing with banning greyhound racing in Scotland. And when we looked I think we're going to be careful also about the term cruelty. This was about dogs that were injured, and whether the word cruelty actually comes to that, we're going to be really careful with that kind of language. However, the Minister did tell the committee that he believes that there is inherent welfare risks associated with greyhound racing at speeds and ovals, risks which, in his view, cannot be eliminated through regulation or good practice. In light of the committee's differing views on the case for a ban, the committee asked the Scottish Government for a fuller explanation of why it now considers welfare risks to be comparable between independent and GB regulated tracks. And I thank the Minister for his letter to the committee responding to this request ahead of this afternoon's debate. Whilst no new data has been provided, I acknowledge the Scottish Government's position that their move to support the bill is based on previous evidence which demonstrates the inherent risk of racing on oval tracks, including the Scottish Animal Welfare Commission's 2023 report. The committee notes that the bill would not prevent greyhounds kept in Scotland from racing elsewhere in the UK, and notes the Minister's recent correspondence which coincides that it is unfortunate that the greyhound kenneling in Scotland greyhounds kennelled in Scotland, which are raced in other parts of the UK, will have a different level of protection afforded to them. Although the immediate impact of the bill would be very limited, given that greyhound racing is not currently taking place in Scotland, it would still prevent racing from recommencing at the Thornton track and would prevent the establishment of any new oval tracks in Scotland. In terms of the bill's provision, should a ban be introduced, we agree with the bill's approach of making it an offence for both the greyhound's owner and the track operator to allow a dog to race. The statistics show that the highest welfare risks are associated with oval tracks. Therefore, the committee agrees that if a ban is introduced, it should apply specifically to oval tracks. We are content with the penalty provision in sections 1 and 2 as drafted, and note the Scottish Government's intention to amend the previous provisions in sections 3 to 9 on enforcement to ensure they are consistent with existing animal welfare legislation. And, Presiding Officer, I look forward to hearing colleagues' views on the bill over the course of this debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Carson. I now call on Minister Jim Fairley. Around 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And I want to begin by recognising the vitally important role that all dogs play in our communities and their contribution to society. And I have to say, one of the biggest losses that I have since coming into this place is the fact that I no longer have a dog that I can spend hours of endless fun with. Because it's important to recognise we want to have the best relationship with our dogs that we can have, and welfare is a vital part of that. I'd also like to remind the Parliament, when this bill was first brought forward as a proposal, the Government did take a neutral stance. At that stage, the proposal sought to prohibit all greyhound racing in Scotland. And given the breadth of that proposal and the fact that the details of precisely what would be prohibited were still being developed, it was entirely pragmatic for the Government to reserve its position until the final content of the bill was known. Additionally, as the Parliament will be aware, the Scottish Government is also considering the feasibility of introducing statutory licensing for greyhound racing and whether this would drive the animal welfare improvements that we all want to see. The bill now before the Scottish Parliament is far more focused in scope, in that it seeks specifically to prohibit the racing of greyhounds on oval tracks. Currently, the Welsh Government are proposing a complete ban on greyhound racing in Wales, and we do not at this point believe that there is sufficient evidence to prohibit greyhound racing on all tracks. It's only the oval tracks. The Scottish Government is committed to setting the highest standards of animal welfare, and we believe that the stated aim of the bill is to address the inherent risks associated with running dogs at speed on oval tracks. Risks that, even with good practice, cannot be eliminated entirely, risks that licensing could not eliminate, and having carefully considered that evidence, the Scottish Government has agreed to support the general principles of this bill, recognising that it represents a proportionate response to those risks. And I'll take Fiona Carson.
Thank you for taking the intervention. I'm confused that the Minister's position changed when it was quite clear there was no other type of racing greyhounds in Scotland other than an oval track. And when the petition was being heard, the Minister was quite content to allow that to continue.
Minister.
As we have rehearsed this on numerous occasions, we went round the same question numerous times when I gave evidence to the committee. We were looking at the broad principle of the bill as it was previously presented, not the one that we currently have before us. But let's be quite clear, there are studies and veterinary reports that have found that when dogs run into bends at high speed, they experience strong sideways forces that make them more likely to lose balance, collide with each other or hit the track barriers. An Australian report calculated that approximately 80% of all catastrophic and major injuries were caused by congestion and incidents such as check, collision and galloping. And I provided that link to the report to the RAIN Committee in my response to their Stage 1 report. The Scottish Animal Welfare Commission's 2022 report on the welfare of greyhounds in racing concluded that oval track design is a key factor in injuries and deaths due to the combination of bends and the speeds at which racing dogs enter those bends, and that these risks cannot be fully mitigated against. Similar concerns are echoed by animal welfare organisations and veterinary reviews, which point to thousands of recorded injuries and numerous fatalities linked to the racing conditions each year internationally. Taken together, that evidence provides a solid animal welfare basis for demonstrating that greyhound racing, as currently practised on oval tracks, exposes dogs to a significant risk that cannot be eliminated by those other measures. As I've already highlighted to the committee and to Mr Ruskell, we will seek some amendments to the bill, and I very much look forward to working with the member on those amendments in the coming weeks. However, while we support the principles of the bill, we are very mindful of the implications for the individuals and the communities connected with greyhound racing in Scotland, particularly those involved in the Thornton track in Fife. In recent years, the activity at Thornton has been on a small scale and largely informal. For many who have continued to run their dogs there, this has been less about serious competition and more about companionship. It's a chance to meet friends and others with a shared interest, to socialise and give their dogs a run on the track. And I want to put on record that I absolutely understand their disappointment. I do not doubt for a single moment their dedication and their love for their dogs. But I do, of course, recognise that the bill will not prevent greyhound owners from meeting and socialising with others to exercise their dogs. They will only commit an offence if the dog is run on an oval track. But we must nonetheless be cognisant of the social and community aspects and the bill's impact on those people. So I'd like to commend Mark Ruskell for his commitment in bringing the welfare of greyhounds to the attention of Parliament. He has been a staunch advocate for them, and he has highlighted and identified an inherent risk in racing on those oval tracks. I'd also like to thank the Rural Affairs Committee for its detailed scrutiny of the bill's proposals and the preparation of their Stage 1 report, which has made some helpful recommendations. In closing, Presiding Officer, we recognise that the bill addresses legitimate welfare concerns, which in practice will affect only a very small number of individuals and animals, given the current minimal activity at Thornton, while preventing the oval tracks being set up for racing elsewhere in Scotland. So I look forward to hearing the rest of the debate, and I'm working closely with Mark Ruskell and with the committee as the bill progresses. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. I now call on Tim Ego to open on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives. Mr Ego is joining us remotely. Around 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I want to begin by recognising the work that Mark Ruskell, MSP, has put into this bill, and I am genuinely grateful for the discussions we have had on this issue in recent months. Whilst I have not been through the Members' Business Bill process myself, I understand the Members' Bill process, myself, I can understand it can be very demanding. There is no doubt that the welfare of animals matters deeply to all of us, and that the intentions behind this bill to protect greyhounds from harm come from a place of genuine concern. But I have to be honest, I struggle to really believe that this is a priority for us in this Parliament, given the very important issues the people of Scotland are looking for us to act on. As the Stage 1 report from the Rural Affairs and Islands Committee made clear, not all members are convinced that a ban is justified at this time. Whilst I note committee narrowly supported the general principles of the bill, there were concerns that there were insufficient new evidence to firmly establish a ban, and a question mark remains for me over proportionality. There is no licensed greyhound racing taking place here in Scotland, with the last fully licensed track having closed several years ago. That raises a fundamental question. Are we legislating to end an activity that already effectively does not exist? And if so, is a blanket prohibition the best or most proportionate way to address welfare concerns? I also want to place on a record a concern about how we have arrived at this point. My understanding is that during earlier consideration of this issue, the Scottish Government was clear that it did not believe a ban was necessary and pointed instead towards regulation and licensing, and I am conscious Jim Fairley has just touched on this. Yet during the passage of the bill, that position has changed. It is important for me that legislation of this nature should be driven by clear reasoning and transparency. A properly designed licensing and regulatory framework, which I understand the government already has powers to introduce, could have gone further in safeguarding the welfare of greyhounds throughout their lives, whether they race in Scotland or elsewhere. Presiding Officer, there are existing animal welfare protections in Scottish law, most notably the Animal Health and Welfare Act, which already make it an offence to cause unnecessary suffering to a protected animal and gives ministers powers to set codes of practice and licensing for animal-related activities. Some stakeholders did argue that strengthening regulation, licensing and oversight could better protect greyhounds throughout their life cycle rather than an outright ban that might drive activities underground or simply displace concerns across borders. Animal welfare does remain an important priority for me and the Scottish Conservatives, and while I do see the motivation behind this bill, because of what I have said above, I'm afraid we can't support it at stage one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Ego. I now call on Rhoda Grant, who is joining us remotely. Up around 4 minutes, please, Ms Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I too want to congratulate Mark Ruskell for taking forward a Members' Bill to this stage. This is the fourth Members' Bill we've had in this Parliament regarding the welfare of dogs, and there's been no action whatsoever by government. I didn't vote for the general principles of the bill because there are no greyhound racetracks in operation in Scotland at the moment. And at best, this might stop one opening, but to open a track, you need planning permission, and that's not a simple process. Indeed, it would be difficult to see how that could happen in the current climate. The Scottish Government proposed a licensing scheme for greyhound racing, but pulled back on that, as was mentioned earlier. Putting that aside, I don't think I need to tell members about the pressure of time in this Parliament after the experience of this week, and unfortunately that's going to become the norm over the next 8 weeks. There's essential legislation that we need to pass coming forward, legislation that will make a huge difference to people's lives, and I'm not convinced we have the luxury to spend time on legislation that will have little or no effect when we risk losing impactful legislation because of it. The bill does not deal with animal welfare issues, so greyhounds will still be bred, trained and housed in Scotland, albeit that they will continue to be raced in England. We need the Scottish Government to bring forward legislation to deal with the welfare of dogs, be they greyhounds or other breeds. We have puppy farms, illegally imported dogs, all held in terrible conditions. No dog should be mistreated, and the government need to act. It's simply not good enough to keep having random members' bills, which, while well-meaning, do very little to tackle the welfare of dogs. The bill only bans oval racetracks, which will leave a loophole, and while straight tracks are seen as much safer, this could lead to a figure of 8 track being developed, and I assume that that would be more dangerous. I'm happy to give way to Maggie Chapman if I have time.
Maggie Chapman.
I thank Rhoda Grant for taking my intervention. I don't think there are many of us in this chamber who would disagree that we need to see action on things like puppy farms, on illegal breeding, on all of the things she listed. None of those things mean that this bill shouldn't go through, though. I'm confused as to her logic there. Why can we not do one thing that is positive for animal welfare while keeping up the pressure to do other things that are positive for animal welfare too?
Rhoda Grant.
And to be fair, that is all this bill does, is put on pressure. It doesn't change. There are no dogs, greyhounds being raced in Scotland at the moment. Should this bill pass, that situation will be exactly the same. It doesn't take into account the welfare of greyhounds that are raced elsewhere. So it seems to me that this is a luxury we can't afford, just to send a signal when there is so much pressure of time within the Parliament. And if I could just mention that it only bans oval greyhound race tracks. It doesn't ban straight ones, which committee evidence suggested were safer. But there is also nothing to stop anyone opening, say, a figure-of-8 track, which, given the sharper bends, would surely be more dangerous. So there is powers in this bill to allow ministers to change the definitions by subordinate legislation, but that will be a delay if that is going to happen. So I'm concerned about that as well. But that said, Scottish Labour are committed to improving the welfare of dogs. We need to deal with the complex issues surrounding breeding, selling, theft and mistreatment of all dogs. Therefore, we'll abstain at the stage 1 of this bill, and should the bill progress, should it have time to progress in this session, we will work hard to improve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Grant. I don't know if Ms. Harper was wanting to make some intervention. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Grant. I think Ms. Grant has concluded her contribution at this point. I now call on Maggie Chapman to open on behalf of the Scottish Greens. Around 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am proud to speak in today's debate in wholehearted and enthusiastic support of Mark Ruskell's Greyhound Racing Offences Scotland Bill. And I want to begin by paying tribute to Mark for his tireless and compassionate, principled leadership on this issue. For years, he has stood alongside campaigners, charities, members of the public and, of course, his beloved Bert, all of whom have asked a simple question: why does a modern Scotland still permit the suffering of animals for entertainment? This bill gives us a clear and humane answer. At its heart, this debate is not really about regulation or licensing schemes. It's about values. It's about whether we accept the torture, injury and premature death of gentle dogs as an acceptable price for gambling and spectacle, for what some might call fun and entertainment. I do not accept that, and I know that many across this chamber do not either. Greyhounds are not disposable commodities. They are sensitive social animals who feel pain, fear and distress just as profoundly as any dog who shares our homes. Yet the evidence is overwhelming that racing them at speed around oval tracks exposes them to inherent and unavoidable risks of serious injury and death. Broken legs, spinal injuries, head trauma, lifelong pain. These are not rare accidents, and perhaps Finlay Carson in his intervention might explain why none of this is cruel.
Finlay Carson.
The member can give him way. We're at risk of getting into an argument who supports animal welfare, who doesn't. That is not the case. I firmly support animal welfare, and I love my dogs as much as anybody else. But we're legislators. We are here to legislate. There is currently no dogs that will benefit from this legislation. The pressure should be on the government to bring forward licensing and proper legislation that will actually stop dogs, whether they're raised in Scotland or England, being protected. This bill doesn't do that.
Maggie Chapman.
If Finlay Carson cares about animal welfare, as he says he does, maybe he should care about future-proofing our legislation as well. And just because this bill doesn't maybe do everything we might want it to do, that doesn't mean to say that this step is not an important one, because broken legs, spinal injuries, head trauma, lifelong pain are not rare accidents, but predictable outcomes of an industry built on speed, strain and profit. No amount of tweaking can change that fundamental reality. As the Scottish Animal Welfare Commission has made clear, regulation cannot remove the inherent harms of greyhound racing. The only way, Mr Carson, to protect these dogs is to end the practice entirely. I also want to recognise the phenomenal work of organisations who have brought us to this point. Scotland Against Greyhound Exploitation, One Kind, Dogs Trust, Blue Cross, the SSPCA and so many others have worked with compassion, rigour and determination to expose the realities of greyhound racing and to advocate for a kinder alternative and a ban. Their briefings for this afternoon's Stage 1 debate do not deal in abstractions. They tell the stories of individual dogs left injured, traumatised or discarded. And then, sometimes, if those dogs are lucky, patiently rehabilitated by charities when the industry could no longer profit from them. Those organisations understand something fundamental, that our responsibility to animals does not end when they stop being useful to us. Public support for this bill is strong and consistent across Scotland. People know that this practice belongs in the past. Other nations are moving on, and Scotland, with its proud history of animal welfare leadership, must not be left behind. This is a modest bill with a profound moral purpose. It prevents future suffering. It draws a clear line against cruelty, and it says that in Scotland, compassion matters more than profit. I urge colleagues across all parties to support Mark Ruskell's bill at stage 1 this afternoon and to stand on the right side of history and of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Chapman. We now move to the open debate, and I call Christine Graham to be followed by Davy Russell. Ms Graham.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Well, I congratulate Mark Ruskell wholeheartedly. I know how tough it is to bring forward a member's bill. You've got to be resilient, negotiate, stay the course. Not meant to be a pun. I've done it myself. 2 successful members' bills, 1 that failed. And I say to Rhoda Grant, who thinks are random, my control of dogs bill brought in the deed, not the breed, dog ward, the person blamed, not the animal. Pioneering. And then they brought welfare of dogs, which was to bring in a code before you get a dog, to try to get demand cut because supply was coming from puppy farms, and we can't make laws out with our jurisdiction. And I say also to Tim Eagle and to anybody else, unless they change the standing orders, every member in this Parliament is entitled to bring forward 2 members' bills per session. I don't see why the government, whoever it is, should have their own way all the time on legislation. No, it's far better that we keep it in this Parliament more democratic. And the other point I want to make in this short contribution is, and I've only got 2 minutes, in this position here, is that if you look at it, it's not an outright ban. It's a ban on oval tracks. That's where the damage is done. Now, I say to Finlay Carson, I don't have the stats in front of me, but the cross-party group had the Great British Greyhound Association in front of them. We've seen the stats. Animals get injured. When they're no use anymore, they're sometimes dumped at the side of the road, at the motorway, so somebody will kill it. I've seen that myself in Midlothian. Or they get their ears cut so that they can't be traced back to an owner. So we're looking at unscrupulous, not all unscrupulous, but some unscrupulous, nefarious goings on when a dog is past its sell-by date. Imagine talking about an animal as if it's a thing with a sell-by date. Now, I also notice that in the section here, and we've got amendments to come yet, the Scottish ministers may by regulation modify the definition of racetrack. And that's by affirmative procedure, which is as it should be. We're going to touch on this. So I think Mark Ruskell's absolutely right. Welfare is at the heart of this. It's certain racetracks. The track record, sorry to make that pun, of injuries to greyhounds, deaths, abandonment and all that is terrible. Stuff that we've all heard of. And at the end of my submission, as I say, I support members' bills, and I hope we continue to have them, and I don't want to see them undermined and attacked. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Graham. I call Davy Russell to be followed by Ronnie Mackay. Mr Russell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My concerns with this bill are that there will be minimum benefits, if any, that will bring animal welfare to the heart of this. Wasting time in this Parliament, banning something that doesn't happen anyway, doesn't sit well with me. Whilst having a detrimental impact on certain constituent groups, namely elderly gentlemen who like a wee bet on the dogs or the horses, but it's a recreational activity from former mining areas. That was why they couldn't afford a horse, but they could afford a greyhound, and they used to run them. That's how this kind of thing started. You know, is next horse racing or even pigeon racing, as some of them still do nowadays? The facts are that greyhound racing is legal in the rest of the UK, and any market demand has simply just to shift over there because it doesn't happen here anyway. Yes.
Alistair Allen.
I thank the member for giving way. I understand the point he makes and the strong views there are on this, but this is something we looked at in committee. Neither the committee nor the Parliament surely can be expected to legislate for what happens in England.
David Russell.
I thank the member for that. But for dogs that remain that have been selectively bred for thousands of years since the time of the Egyptians, losing their place culturally will accelerate the extinction of the breed, mainly due to huge feeding and exercise demands. Greyhounds aren't just a wee natural pet. They're not easy household pets, although I'm sure that their owners love them and dearly. I know they have very good temperaments as well, and I have friends that have greyhounds, so I know this. Right. As with other issues, the urge for members to jump on the ban button is too great. But if there are concerns about animal welfare of greyhound racing, then surely the solution is to improve the standards and improve monitoring. If Mr Ruskell wants to ban and want to look at animal safety and welfare, perhaps he should look at the venture capital acquisitions of veterinary surgeries, which are having far wider impacts on owners' potentiality and all domestic pets, as well as farmers, putting costs through the roof for any pet and animal welfare and illnesses that they have. If intervention about this being a reserved matter, there are some areas that are reserved and some areas that are devolved. Animal welfare standards are devolved, and the UK Labour Government is making reforms of the private veterinary sector to make sure that prices are competitive, with further inquiry outcomes planned. By choosing to tackle a niche sport that members will already be aware doesn't currently operate in Scotland, Mr Ruskell's bill is chasing headlines rather than chasing a shared sense of the need to preserve and improve animal welfare and standards overall. We have a raft of other issues that are higher up the concerns of the Scottish people: NHS waiting lists, housing waiting lists, cost of living crisis, to name but a few. But of course, as a Labour MSP, I want to see the life of an animal valued. And of course, I recognise that there are people who feel strongly about this issue. But I want to see the limited bandwidth on these issues used for more meaningful and less niche issues that, as far as I believe, will point a judging finger at my older constituents whom only just go out a walk sometimes, down to the bookies, and sometimes they like putting a wee bet on the dog racing, but that's them. And it does nothing for the welfare of the greyhound breed, and it will take them a step closer to extinction, or at best accelerate their addition to the rare breed list. We do recognise this bill will change at subsequent stages, and we will look at these to improve it pending.
Thank you, Mr Russell. And I now call Rona Mackay. Ms Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This bill has been a long time coming, and I thank Mark Ruskell for all his work and determination in getting it to stage 1. Presiding Officer, I'm not going to mince my words. Greyhound racing is barbaric, and I abhor it. And I'm completely baffled by the Labour Party, by Rhoda Grant, by Finlay Carson and the Tories, who talk about animal welfare and aren't prepared to pass the general principles of this bill. It just doesn't make any sense at all. Animals are not a product or a commodity to be used for human entertainment and profit. Between 2017 and 2020, 15 greyhounds died at Shawfield Stadium in Glasgow, a licensed stadium, and countless were injured or disposed of, often referred to by the sector as wastage. It's disgusting. Thankfully, Shawfield is now closed. Thornton Track's not licensed or regulated, so we'll never know how many animals die or are injured and suffering at this facility, we'll go back to the convener's point, and no vet is ever present when the dogs race. So great work by campaigners has highlighted serious welfare concerns for racing greyhounds, including a culture of drugging dogs, poor diet, an uncertain fate once their so-called career is over, which often includes euthanasia. I recently saw a horrific video of a dog being trapped in the pen as it tried to run out when the starter gun fired. No animal should suffer like that. These beautiful, gentle dogs spend most of their time in often dank, dirty kennels and suffer untreated wounds and injuries. And they may be constantly muzzled, which is unbearably stressful for them. They're forced to race during 32 degrees heat, and that is downright cruelty. Enough is enough. The abuse of these beautiful, gentle dogs must end now. Scotland now has the chance to end this barbarity and prove that we are a caring, compassionate nation where animals are treated with the respect they deserve. In the name of kindness, I urge you to support this bill at stage 1.
Thank you, Ms Mackay. We now move to closing speeches. I call on Gillian Mackay to close on behalf of the Scottish Greens. And Ms Mackay is joining us remotely.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to begin, as others have, by extending my thanks to my wonderful friend and colleague Mark Ruskell for bringing forward this bill. Mr Ruskell has been a long-time champion of this issue, and it's wonderful to see his efforts and the efforts of many tireless campaigners coming to fruition. Having been through the Members' Bill process myself, it cannot be understated how this process can take over your entire life. A huge thanks should also be extended to the campaigners, Non-Government Bills Unit and Mark's staff team who have processed hundreds of responses to his consultation. Many of you will know how personally committed Mr Ruskell is to the welfare of greyhounds, and no wonder. For too long, greyhounds have suffered cruelly and unnecessarily in the name of gambling. Some contributions this afternoon have been outright confusing. Rhoda Grant simultaneously claimed that the bill is unnecessary because there is no racing and that anyone who would open an oval track would have other barriers to overcome, while claiming that the bill doesn't go far enough because it doesn't include other tracks that would also have to overcome those same barriers. How on earth Davy Russell can say it won't improve welfare is frankly incredible when everyone is saying when there's clear evidence on how often these dogs are injured. These dogs make incredible pets and should be treated kindly and humanely. In its report on the welfare of greyhounds used for racing, the Scottish Welfare Commission listed several causes of welfare concern, particularly the risk of injury or death and the conditions under which they are reared as a significant part of a dog's life that may be spent in kennels with restricted social contacts and risks of neglect and poor veterinary care once their racing careers are over. That same report concluded that greyhound racing is inherently dangerous for the dogs involved. The report also cited the oversupply of puppies as a significant harm. It's estimated around 6,000 greyhound puppies are culled in Ireland each year as a result of overbreeding. That is heartbreaking, and these are dogs, not commodities. An end to racing is the only way to ensure that this suffering ends. Regulation cannot protect greyhounds from the inherent risk of injury and death or address wider welfare concerns. The Greyhound Board of Great Britain's data shows that the number of trackside deaths has increased annually since 2022. Injuries also remain far too high. Some injured dogs are made to race, compounding their injuries and making it harder for them to heal. According to the Dogs Trust and the Blue Cross, injuries and long-term conditions include fractures, muscle, ligament and tendon injuries, including ruptured skin wounds and osteoarthritis. The evidence is clear. Without a ban, greyhounds will continue to suffer excruciating injuries which impact the length and quality of their lives. Research has shown that the turns or bends of an oval racetrack provide unique risks for racing dogs for a number of reasons, including asymmetric training and racing, centrifugal force and congestion. The risk of death and injury is literally built into the way these tracks operate. This bill will help greyhounds across Scotland. It'll help them to live full, fulfilling lives as every dog deserves. So for Bluesy, Bob, Cass and the always wonderful Bert, it's time to back the bill and end greyhound racing for good.
Thank you, Ms Mackay. I now call on Rhoda Grant to close on behalf of Scottish Labour. Ms Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I first apologise to Christine Graham? I certainly didn't mean to diminish her role in bringing forward legislation with regard to dog welfare. She has done that, and I also understand how difficult it is to bring forward members' bills. I've done that, so neither did I wish to diminish that. But I think she would agree, and I think most people would agree, that we need a comprehensive bill that deals with dog welfare, indeed animal welfare with regard to pets, because we've had a number of members' bills, a piecemeal approach towards the welfare of dogs. We've had Christine's own bills. I'll take an intervention from Christine.
Christine Graham.
First of all, I thank you for your kind words, Ms Grant. We've worked together for many years on a parliamentary and personal level, so thank you for that. I would like to say I support what you say. I think we need a Consolidation
Act.
Always through the chair,
Ms Graham.
I beg your pardon, I'm always doing that. Convener, Presiding Officer, it's been a long week. Presiding Officer, I do agree. I think we need a Consolidation Act because anybody who's trying to enforce the legislation wants to find it in one place, not higgledy-piggledy here and there.
Rosie Grant.
I absolutely agree with what Christine Graham's saying, but we also need to pull the current legislation together in one act. But I think we also need to add to it because I believe there are things missing from the current legislation. It doesn't cover things like housing. Breeding is a big issue, especially when animals are imported. And one of the things we also discussed was the illegal importation of dogs into the UK and Scotland. Many of those animals coming into the country ill and bred in very poor conditions, people paying huge amounts of money for them, but at the same time maybe buying a dog that is not going to survive. So all of those things have to be dealt with. And Davy Russell talked about the cost of vet care, and it is spiralling out of control. And people who are buying dogs illegally from other countries are often buying dogs that need huge amounts of veterinary care, and that is very, very difficult for them. And we need to discourage people from importing dogs illegally. And we also need to look at how we can help people to afford veterinary care, because too often we hear of families having to put to sleep the family pet, which is very much part of a household, and just because they cannot afford to get that animal the care that it needs. So there are many issues with regard to animal welfare that we need to deal with that probably should be included beyond this bill. This bill covers activities that do not happen in Scotland, and that's where my concern lies. There is so much that we should be doing that is not included in this bill, and therefore we need to look very hard at making sure that the next Parliament brings forward comprehensive legislation on animal welfare, and that could really make a difference both to greyhounds but every other breed that is sought after for various reasons. So I hope the next government will look at this and make sure that animal welfare is consolidated but also added to. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Grant. I now call on Jamie Halker-Johnson to close on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I congratulate Mark Ruskell on bringing his Members' Bill forward to Stage 1. Wherever we may fall on the content of the bill, it's clearly been the product of a lengthy process and considerable effort on his part, as well as being motivated by a legitimate concern for animal welfare. And I would also like to put my thanks to the committee for all their work in producing their Stage 1 report. As we've heard, we're in the unusual position of being asked to consider legislation to ban something which doesn't happen within the jurisdiction of this Parliament. This remains, however, an issue that can evoke strong feelings in its advocates, and it is also one that may have practical considerations in the future, and I'll consider those later. On the other side of the coin is a sport which clearly evokes real passion and a dedication to a breed that was bred specifically for coursing and racing. And several organisations have provided evidence on the bill in the committee's call for views. These responses can be broadly broken down into animal welfare groups who are overwhelmingly positive on the proposed ban, and those involved in greyhound racing who are very much not. There are, of course, two, in essence, very entrenched and polarised positions. Both have, however, expressed great concern for the welfare of these animals, and it's welcome that the sector has pointed to the immense improvement in both on-track and off-track welfare of these dogs. The Greyhound Board of Great Britain has highlighted to a range of steps taken in England enforced through licensing. We're all aware that no system will protect every dog from cruelty. Whether they're racing dogs, working dogs or pets, there are all too many cases of dogs being victims of abuse and ill treatment at the hands of humans. That, to any right-thinking person, would be abhorrent. The members' consultation and call for evidence responses showed accounts that were very much at odds with each other in terms of welfare, and particularly off-track welfare. Many involved in the sector spoke of racing greyhounds being treated as pets and cared about deeply by the majority of trainers. However, there were also several stories of presumed mistreatment documented by greyhound rehomers, who observed both mental and physical impacts in former racing dogs. There clearly needs to be a greater understanding of this and, above all, appropriate policing and investigation of animal welfare cases. This is a particular concern where advocates of greyhound racing have raised the prospect of a ban pushing activities underground into a space that is unregulated and beyond open scrutiny. To turn to the bill itself in more detail, Mark Ruskell has been candid about the focus on oval tracks. The bill leaves any other form of track racing to regulations. The Scottish Government, however, should be open on its position here. Is it waiting to criminalise racing on the straight or other track types, and if so, why does it not provide clarity on that position now? The bill is also one that is breed-specific. The potential loopholes here are considerable. Whippet racing currently lacks the commercial element of greyhound racing, but it does look very similar. And where dogs are used in activities other than racing on an oval track, whether it's agility shows or working activities, do we not accept there is some risks of the same? I mention this because the legislation of this type is walking a tightrope between creating legal and illegal alternatives to established practices on one hand and capturing unintended activities on others. This is only made more pressing by the earlier point that the practice this bill actually seeks to address is not happening in Scotland. If I can turn very, very briefly to... I'm sorry, I'm just finishing, Mr Harvey. I really don't have time. My colleague Finn Carson, speaking after the committee, highlighted that the committee itself weren't agreed on the need for this bill, and Tim Eagle again highlighted that the recognition of some stakeholders believe that regulation are actually more effective in the welfare issues that are raised. The Minister himself, like I think all of us, recognise the value of dogs, and I'm very much with him on the missing the dog I have. It was a Labrador, so there's no chance of that being raised any time soon. But we all, I think, around this chamber recognise the affection that people have for their dogs. Rhoda highlighted whether this bill was a priority or not because of the lack of activity in Scotland, and it changes nothing. Maggie Chapman, I think the rhetoric around torture of animals and for the entertainment of humans was perhaps unfortunate, but it maybe highlighted where we're coming. I would ask, well, I won't ask because I haven't got time to take the invention, but it does concern me about where Maggie Chapman may want these sorts of bans to finish. I have to say, David Russell was a very combative approach, and talking about priorities, which I would agree with. But I do think, Mr Russell, that probably Mr Ruskell's bill here is done with the best intentions rather than just about highlighting and showboating. Presiding Officer, I recognise I've not got time. I believe there is a wide recognition for what this bill is attempting to achieve. However, the bill is using greyhound racing as a proxy for wider issues around dog welfare. There is an acceptance that this bill is narrow, so narrow that it addresses a problem that we all recognise doesn't exist. What I'd like to see, rather than legislation, is a commitment from the Scottish Government to investing in proper policing and enforcement of animal welfare cases, whether they arise in the course of racing or any other activity.
Thank you, Mr Halker-Johnson. I call on Minister Jim Fairley to close on behalf of the Scottish Government.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And I genuinely want to thank all the members for their contributions to this debate, and I'm very glad that Rhoda Grant reminded herself about the enormous amount of work that Christine Graham did in bringing forward her Welfare of Dogs Bill, and our officials are currently working with her on the Code of Practice. But just some of the other things that are being done by the Scottish Government in terms of animal welfare. We're part of the UK bill to control the import of dogs, cats and ferrets. We're looking at regulation of canine fertility clinic activities. We're looking at licensing for dog-related activities such as dog walking and dog boarding. And I understand the position that people are saying we should have all that in one piece of legislation. But right now, we don't have the ability to be able to do that. So these pieces of legislation that we're putting in place demonstrate that the Government is taking animal welfare very seriously indeed. But going back to the subject of the bill that we've got in front of us today, I continue to believe that the stated aim of the bill is to address the inherent welfare risks associated with running dogs at speed on oval tracks, risks which, even with good practice cannot be eliminated entirely, and at risks that licensing could not eliminate. And the Government supports the principles of the bill because it is targeted, its proportionate response to a specific welfare risk associated with the tracks of that oval design. Licensing can undoubtedly improve standards, it can bring transparency, and it can ensure accountability, but it would not remove the welfare risks inherent to racing greyhounds on tracks of an oval design, and this bill in its current form would achieve that. I'll take the intervention.
I'm going to go back to the point because I think what's missing here is we don't think the bill will actually address the concerns that Mark Ruskell wants to bring forward. You know, the Minister itself, at this time, the Scottish Government is not persuaded of the need to ban greyhound racing in Scotland. In particular, we're not convinced that a ban on greyhound racing in Scotland is proportionate and a fair response to animal welfare concerns. Is the Minister, when he made that statement, aware of any other racing of greyhounds in Scotland other than in ovals?
Minister.
As we've narrated this so many times, I'm beginning to get dizzy. We've narrated it so many times, I'm beginning to get dizzy. When the initial session I did in the committee, we were talking about a much broader scope of a bill. Mr Ruskell then brought back the bill that we currently have in front of us, and the government have decided that the support of that bill on the basis of the fact that it is focusing on oval designs. And Mr Carson is sitting chuntering away there. And he's talking about there's only an oval track. Now, I don't know where members are on this, because Davy Russell, Rhoda Grant, Jamie Halkridge, they've all said there's no racing happening in Scotland, but there is a track in Scotland. It's in Thornton, and it still has the ability, with an oval track, to race greyhounds. And I'll take Patrick Harvey's intervention.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. I wonder if he finds it as difficult as I do to understand this line of argument that this particular form of racing isn't happening. Doesn't he share my cynicism that if this bill had been brought just a few years ago, the very same members raising this argument would be telling us that we've got no business shutting down an economically viable business? They'd be using a different argument to achieve the same effect.
Minister.
I will not put words or thoughts in the minds of other members. They are more than capable of making those points for themselves. But I understand the point that Mr Harvey is trying to make. But I'm going to go back to the Thornton track, because I'd want to put this on the record. They absolutely understand and respect the social value that Thornton provided to a small community, and we recognise that those who attended to race their dogs are going to be disappointed that we are supporting the bill's principles. But I'm going to quote from the study by the University of Technology in Sydney. A low number of spectators attending race meets does not warrant or justify the continued usage of oval-shaped tracks. So Scotland's animal welfare must be protected, and this bill will do that. We don't expect major rehoming issues, because that was something that was raised as well. We don't expect major rehoming issues to arise in Scotland as a consequence of the bill. Excuse me. And I'll note that both the Dogs Trust and the Scottish SPCA have supported the bill, and we will continue to engage with rehoming charities. We will monitor the situation closely and offer support where it may be required. And I want to emphasise that the Government's position on this bill relates solely to the specific welfare concerns raised in evidence based on the evidence presented regarding greyhounds and oval tracks, and it should not be interpreted as indicating a wider position on other animal-related sports, as was mentioned by somebody else, each which has its own circumstances, its own regulatory framework and evidence base to consider. I'll also note here that there is a huge public support for this bill. It's the most signed publication in this Parliament's history to ban the activity. So I will continue to commit to working with Mark Ruskell and with the Rural Affairs and Islands community on the bill, and ensure that it addresses the inherent welfare risks associated with running dogs at speed on oval tracks. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. And I now call on Mark Ruskell, Member in Charge, to wind up the debate. Mr Ruskell.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I thank all members for their wide-ranging contributions this afternoon. I note the contributions from Mr Carson, but I do think he spent quite a lot of this debate really bolstering what was a minority view in the committee, rather than the view of the majority of members of the committee who do accept that there is an evidence base there to push ahead with a ban. I'd like to thank all the members who've spoken in favour of the ban and my bill here this afternoon: Gillian Mackay, Christine Graham, John Mason, Rona Mackay, Maggie Chapman. And I'd like to thank other members who've not been able to speak but are deeply passionate about this issue, have engaged with the evidence. Unfortunately, it appears that Mr Russell has not, and have come to the conclusion that we absolutely need to ban greyhound racing. Their personal support for me and the work that I've done and my team's done on this bill has been really superb over the last few years. But I am saddened that there are members who still feel that there is insufficient evidence here. I mean, I am absolutely dripping in evidence. The evidence that we've had that's come to committee, the evidence that's come to this Parliament over years and years and years, evidence that's come from the industry itself, figures Saddening figures that come out every single year, detailing the injuries, detailing the deaths. And every single one of these figures represents dogs, represents real dogs. And it's just incredibly sad to see this evidence coming in. And of course, we've had the testimony of those people like myself and hundreds of other people across Scotland who have rehomed greyhounds, who see the long-term impact of injury and trauma on these dogs. And I think it's fair to say that the committee, when it comes to the issue of licensed or unlicensed track, the committee had no evidence to show that the inherent risk of racing greyhounds at an unlicensed track was less than racing a dog at a licensed track. It makes no difference to the dog who the owner is of the greyhound racing track. The laws of physics don't magically change about whether a dog races at a track at Thornton or Newcastle or anywhere else. The evidence is the evidence, and the Minister pointed to the scientific studies that have been done that show that impact on the dogs and how it results in injury and how it results in death. A number of members have raised the prospect of this activity going underground, but you can see a greyhound track from space. These are fast dogs. They need big spaces to race. And of course, ministers will have that power going forward, should they choose to use it to define a track. But I feel the kind of bizarre suggestion from Rhoda Grant that they'll suddenly have, figure-of-8 racetracks, a kind of scale-electrics for greyhounds. I'm not sure what happens when they cross over in the middle. I mean, this is fantasy stuff. I mean, the bill is well defined. Ministers will have the power to define that going forward, should they need to. Members have reflected on the concerns around dogs that are being kennelled and traded in Scotland, then going over the border. I don't have time. I've got quite a lot to get through. Dogs going over the border to England. But I'm also concerned about the dogs, if we don't ban greyhound racing in Scotland, that will come from England and Wales and Ireland to Scotland to race. I'm concerned about those dogs as well. And of course, we can only legislate for Scotland. I would love to see greyhound racing banned in Newcastle and Sunderland. But, we're in the Scottish Parliament, and if Rhoda Grant wants to see greyhound racing banned across the UK, then she should speak to her colleagues in Wales, who are pushing a bill through right now to achieve that in Wales, and she should speak to her UK government colleagues as well, who have the opportunity to do this at Westminster. The one thing I would pick up with the Welsh Government's work on this is that they have made a commitment to review wider licensing of the transport, the kennelling, the breeding of greyhounds. I think that is an area, Minister, where the Scottish Government should work with the Welsh Government. There is unfinished business there. I need to make progress. There is unfinished business there, and although this is not part of the bill that I brought forward, which is narrowly drawn, there is certainly work the Scottish Government must do. To answer Tim Eagle and point about the existence of the 2006 Animal Welfare Act, it hasn't been effective. It's been extremely difficult to bring forward prosecutions of unnecessary suffering because greyhound racing is an inherently lawful activity. And he points to licensing being the way forward. Licensing is the problem. We have licensed greyhound racing at the moment. And that's where the injuries and deaths are happening, on licensed tracks as well as unlicensed tracks. So the thought that licensing is going to be some solution to this is just not the case. I see time is moving on, Presiding Officer, so I'd like to conclude. And can I say that there is an opportunity for MSPs tonight to be on the right side of history here. And if there are members like Rhoda Grant and Davy Russell and Finlay Carson and Tim Eagle who want to see a resurgence of greyhound racing in Scotland with all the resultant injury and death to the dogs, then they are free to vote against this bill. They're free to vote against this bill and send a signal for racing to start up again and to expand in Scotland. And I would point to the comments of the owner of the Thornton Greyhound racing track, who has said that the only reason why he's not expanded greyhound racing at that track is because of this campaign and because of this bill. This is the only thing stopping greyhound racing expand in Scotland. For the rest of us who want to end the suffering of these dogs, vote for this bill at stage 1. Let's get this ban over the line before dissolution.
Thank you, Mr Ruskell. That concludes the debate on the Greyhound Racing Offences Scotland Bill at Stage 1. And we will now move on to the next item of business. And the next item of business is a debate on motion 20579 in the name of Jim Fairley, on the common organisation of the markets in agricultural products, fruit and vegetables, miscellaneous amendment Scotland Regulations 2026 draft. I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Minister Jim Fairley to speak to and to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And I'm pleased to open this debate and move that the Parliament approves the common organisation of markets in agricultural products, fruit and veg, miscellaneous amendment Scotland Regulations 2026. And I move it in my name. This draft instrument was considered by the Rural Affairs and Islands Committee on the 17th December, but the committee did not approve it. However, many of the concerns raised related to matters outside the specific scope of this SSI. During the session, 2 members indicated they would support the instrument in Chamber, providing their clarification and reassurance on the issues raised. Since then, I have worked constructively with a range of members and stakeholders about the points previously raised, and I have sought to address the concerns raised and to provide points of clarification about the importance of the Fruit and Veg Aid Scheme for our Scottish producers. The draft regulations would do the following key things. They will provide stability to stakeholders that receive funding via the Fruit and Veg Aid Scheme. They will enable the Scottish Government to better plan the budget allocation for the scheme and, importantly, to ensure that the Scottish Government funding remains for Scottish producers. The Fruit and Veg Aid Scheme is a legacy EU scheme which has been a success here in Scotland. It relies on collaborative working, which encourages innovation, sustainability and investment at scale that growers could not benefit from on an individual basis. It is valuable and it remains an important source of support for the fresh produce sector here in Scotland. However, I recognise that the model does not suit everyone, particularly as the power to recognise a producer organisation, which is a prerequisite for the scheme, lies with the Secretary of State. This scheme should not be the sole mechanism of support for the sector, and I am committed to doing more for small producers, and we will work with stakeholders at pace to understand what they need to do to thrive. And that will include providing funding for an audit to understand the shape of the small fruit and vegetable producer sector and what forms of support it needs to thrive. If this SSI is not passed, we risk facing increases in budget requirements, which puts other valuable agricultural funding at risk. So I hope that the Chamber agrees that the proposed changes are necessary, and I would urge you to agree, the Chamber to agree to the motion and approve this draft regulation. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. I note that no other member has sought to speak in the debate, and therefore that concludes the debate on the common organisation of the markets in agricultural products, fruit and vegetables, miscellaneous amendment Scotland Regulations 2026 draft. And there will be a short pause before we move on to the next item of business. Thank you, members. I will suspend briefly, and hopefully all members who are supposed to be here for the next follow-on business will be here very soon.